Has life put you in a situation where you might need to pivot? If everything is changing in front of you, around you, and you are stressed, worried, disconcerted about it, this is the podcast for you. We're going to answer your questions today. I have expert guest Peg Arnold. She is a national speaker, an international author, and a drama queen for Jesus. She is not retired, but repurposed. I'm so excited to talk to you today, Peg. Welcome to Flourish-Meant.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be with you today, Tina, and with all of your listeners.
Well, Peg, let's dive right into that topic of needing to pivot. A lot of people listening and watching today may be really stressed in this place. Life has changed. And as human beings, our brains, our bodies, our spirits want us to be secure and stable. We do not like pivoting. It is naturally something we don't react to well. We come at that with a reaction of fear usually, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And God doesn't want us to have a spirit of fear in anything. So when we enter into these times of pivoting, our brains start telling us and working through those what ifs, and it's very anxious and a stressful time for all of us. We've gone through several pivoting times within our lives. One of the most recent ones was a huge move that we made. And I know you made a huge move recently as well. So that huge move wasn't on my agenda. Let's put it that way. Do you sense a little control out of me? And I think those of us that want control over our situations have a hard time pivoting as well. But my children, we all lived on the East Coast. We had lived in the same house for 32 years outside of Washington, D.C. My daughter and her family lived in Virginia. My son and his family lived in Pennsylvania. And I thought we had a nice little triangle there. And all of a sudden, within 2 years, they were both out in Colorado. Colorado is like a different country when you live on the East Coast. And I had never even considered moving out of the area. If I'd moved out of the area, I would have moved to a place like Michigan where I grew up, something that I was familiar with. And so my husband was ready to move. I was working full time. And I didn't see any reason why we would have to pull up roots and move from a house. When you think 32 years, our roots went deep. I like to describe us like oak trees. And you know, when you transplant an oak tree, a huge truck comes in and it digs at least a 10-foot diameter square to get all the roots up and pulls it out of the ground. It's a huge process. I felt like I was an oak tree and God was asking me to transplant in a place that oak trees are not native to the area. Let's put it that way. And I was questioning God. I was on a walk and saying, but Lord, you said, and I used the word retired back then. You said when I retired, when I would quit my job with education, I was a full-time teacher and counselor, that I would go into my ministry full-time. And I was doing ministry at the time, speaking around. And I had the Lord really speak right to me. And he said, Peg, what makes you think I don't have things prepared for you in Colorado? It hit me right here. And I started weeping, and I walked home, and my husband actually saw me walk in the door, and he looked at my face and he said, well, something happened on that walk. And I looked at him. I said, we're moving to Colorado. I don't know when, how, what it's going to be, but we're moving. I hadn't planned to retire. I probably had a few more years left. And all of a sudden, the time moved very quickly, because within less than a year after that walk with the Lord, we had purchased a house and we were packing up and putting our house on the market. I put on my retirement papers. I said, I'm not retiring, I'm repurposing. And that's where that comes from, because I had a lot of things that the Lord still had for me to do. But this whole moving from where my roots went deep and saying goodbye to friends who were like family, I had a lot of fear. my mind would race. I couldn't sleep. I'm an eater when I'm stressed out. So I ate probably all the wrong things. And I just started giving in to this fear and not giving trust to God, because he's the one who said, what makes you think I don't have things prepared for you in Colorado? So one of the things I found that I needed to have a foundational prayer and verse that I could go to when I became anxious. And of course, the Lord gave me first Joshua 1:9. Joshua 1:9 was very pivotal because it says, be strong and courageous. Well, what I was doing required strength and courage. And do not fear, do not be dismayed. So right there, he addresses my fear. And then he says, for the Lord is with you wherever you go. And when you read that whole story, he says it to Moses. Moses says it to Joshua. God says it to Joshua. And God also says, I was with you before, I am with you now, and I go before you. And that was a promise that I could look to God and say, yes, you went before the Israelites. You went with the Israelites. You were with them in the past, and you're going to be with us. And so that was one of the first things that I came to in the acceptance of this huge transition that was turning my world completely upside down.
So you addressed the stress and the fear with your relationship with God and your faith, and looking to some scriptures and some time with God to anchor you in the midst of what seems so incredibly unsettled. I think another thing that we often don't acknowledge when we have to pivot is grief. We're letting go of something that we have been clinging to that has been such a huge part, especially when you're leaving the house that you raise your children in, or you are living the role of being a mother because your kids have left, or you're leaving a job. There's grief in leaving a job, whether you wanted to leave it or not. It's still grief. So can you talk about how the Lord helped you through the grief, and what were some of the things that you did to help process that grief?
Thank you for addressing that, because I think a lot of times we don't name it as grief. And I'm glad you used that word, because we think of grief as the loss of a person, but grief is a loss of our identity when we leave a job. Grief is a loss of the finances that we might have been dependent on. Grief is the loss of changing friends. And like you said, moving from a place where you're familiar, where the memories are, where we raised our kids. I found that I needed to address it in 4 different areas. I needed to address it not only in my spiritual area, I needed to look at how I was caring. And in my spiritual, it was leaning on scriptures and the faithfulness of God, but finding joys in the midst of the challenges. James says that, despite all that we go through, we should consider it all joy. Well, it doesn't feel like joy when we're going through challenges. It doesn't feel like joy at all. However, if we look for the little joys and the little things to be grateful for, they're almost like jewels amidst the rubble that God shows us. And so choosing a verse, I started leaning on Philippians 4, and it starts in verse 4 with rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. And what God does is, in his faithfulness, there is joy. We think of joy centered around what our circumstances are, and we associate and confuse joy with happiness. Joy is a deep internal sense of knowing that God is faithful in everything, and God loves us and has our best interests at heart, and it's trusting in him. That's joy and a peace that comes, and that's a promise that comes from God. So joy isn't putting on the fake happiness. It's looking for those little spots. And some of those little spots were, I would be in tears and saying, overwhelmed with the packing up and the giving away of so many things because I'm going through, report cards and art projects and trophies and all these things that aren't going to come to Colorado. And I'm just grieving all of that. And I just looked at my husband. I said, I've got to get out of this. And so one of the things is when a task is overwhelming you, find where you can physically take a break. Change your environment. And so that's one of the things in a physical. You want to find where do you find rest, peace, distraction, and not distraction in a bad way, but to take a walk. And my husband said, let's get in the car, and we live near the C&O Canal. Let's go walk along the C&O Canal, which we love to do. And nature really feeds my soul and makes me feel close to God. And as we were walking, we looked up, and in the East Coast, when big birds are circling, they are typically vultures looking for carrion. And as we looked up, I said, that's not a vulture, honey. That's an eagle. And it was like this promise of God. It says, that was his faithfulness of that eagle, that promise, in Isaiah 40:31, where it says, those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall rise up with wings as eagles, walk and not faint, run and not be weary. I felt that reassurance. So one of the things I would say, yes, take time to grieve, but when that stress gets overwhelming, find places where you can find joy and rejoice, and take a break if you need to take a break. Change your environment.
Peg, I know that we've got more that we can dive into about this topic, and I can't wait to get to the second half of our conversation so we can explore it further. But for now, can you list your links and how people can stay connected with you, get all of your benefits and resources?
Oh, absolutely. If you go on my website, www.pegarnold.org, there will be a pop-up, or there's a couple of places that you can get. I write devotions for the distracted heart. And so there's blogs on the website itself, but you can also get a free devotion or a free prayer book sent straight to you. And I would send you a free devotion each month. I also am on Facebook. I hang out on Instagram. I would love to have you join me there. I do a little live video on devotions once a week called Devotions on the Deck.
I hope that all of you listening were encouraged and equipped to face whatever pivot is in front of you right now. And of course, I also hope that you will come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.